Hello guys, my name is Sienna and today we are going to be talking about part 2 of leopard gecko care. So in the last part, we went over a lot of the basics of what goes inside the tank. But today I wanted to talk a little bit more about handling your leopard gecko, experiences at the vet, lifespan, and what you should be feeding your leopard gecko. To start off, let's jump straight into the feeding. So a good thing to note is that leopard geckos are insectivores. So what that means is that in the wild, they only really eat insects. So that eliminates off the table all fruits or vegetables or meats or anything else that you would want to feed your leopard gecko. All they're really going to be eating is insects. As for what insects you should be feeding them, there are quite a few options, some harder to find than others, but the 3 staple ones that I suggest would be dubia roaches, mealworms, and crickets. All 3 of these I have had experiences with and also fed to Dormy before. Also, if you weren't here for the first video, this is again Dormy. So each of these 3 insects obviously have their pros and cons, and each reptile owner is going to suggest a different one. But just as the basics, crickets generally are really good escape artists. So if you are going to be feeding your leopard gecko crickets, you're pretty much committing to having a ton of crickets bouncing around your room at some point. But crickets are pretty cheap and they're really easy to find. You can pretty much find crickets at any pet store. The size of the crickets that you are going to want is also going to depend on your leopard gecko size. Crickets come in size increments of about 1/4 of an inch, so you can buy them in 1/4 inch size, 1/2 inch size, sometimes 3/4 inch size, and then also a full inch size. A full inch size is generally going to be a little too large because how you tell how big a cricket you should be feeding your gecko is based off of the distance between their eyes. If you can measure that or guesstimate that, that's about going to be the size that you need. Just as an example, I feed Dormy 1/2 inch crickets. The second insect you can feed your leopard gecko is going to be mealworms, and mealworms are super simple. They're pretty much just worms that you have in a container on hand and you're able to feed when you need to. They do tend to have a harder exoskeleton, which can sometimes be hard for these guys to digest, but it's really up to your own leopard gecko's preferences and just getting to know them, because I know Dormy hasn't ever had any problems with eating mealworms. Mealworms also don't really move around, so if your gecko is really sensitive to wanting to hunt something, mealworm's really not going to be your best bet. And finally, dubia roaches. Dubia roaches are probably the healthiest of the 3 options, but they are also the most expensive. What I ended up doing was I bought about 100 of them at a reptile expo, and then I've been breeding them since. This means that I have pretty much a limitless supply of food for this guy without having to pay for it, and it's also a really healthy insect to spice up his diet with. These guys also have an easier temperament than the crickets do, so they're less likely to escape. They do, however, get quite large if you are planning on breeding them. So if you are a bit squeamish, they do kind of resemble cockroaches. So if you don't want that, then dubia roaches might not be your thing. As for how many insects you should be feeding your leopard gecko, I would say it depends on not only the age of the leopard gecko, but also the size of the leopard gecko. What are you doing? So if your leopard gecko is on the younger side, then I would suggest probably, what are you doing? For an adult leopard gecko, for crickets, is about 5 to 7, 3 to 4 times a week, or every other day if they are juvenile. For mealworms, it's about 1 to 2 times the number of inches your leopard gecko is long. Again, you're just gonna have to break out that ruler. And then for dubia roaches, it's going to be slightly less than the crickets just because they're a little bit of a larger insect. But you aren't going to ever be feeding adult dubia roaches to leopard geckos. With all that being said about how to feed your leopard gecko, let's move on to veterinarians, whether or not you should go to them, and also sickness in these little guys. I know when I first joined the hobby, I thought that just having really good husbandry would be able to keep these guys from ever getting sick. That is not the case for reptiles or any animal, including humans. So it's unreasonable to expect that your animal is never going to be getting sick. That's why it's always important to have a backup plan if something ends up happening, and that often does include a vet. When I first got this guy, he had some problems with tail necrosis, which is just tail rot, where the tip of their tail ends up dying off. This was because of some stuck shed that was left on by the previous owner, but I did end up having to go to the vet for this guy. Vet bills can be quite expensive, and is the type of expense that you might not be expecting. So it's always good to keep in mind that maybe having a stash of $100 or $200 just in reserve would be good, just in case these guys do get sick. Now, obviously, there's some signs to look out for sickness, but it's similar to any other animal. Things like lethargy, not eating, irregular bowel movements or irregular looking fecal samples, looking extremely underweight, and lack of appetite, along with many other symptoms, could be an indicator that your leopard gecko needs to go to the vet or you need to be paying special attention to them. Dorms? So it's just a good thing to keep in mind. Along with this, the lifespan of leopard geckos is around 10 to 15 years and maybe even longer. So that is really what your goal is for keeping these guys alive. My arm's not a ramp. Maybe it is. And now, handling of your leopard gecko. Obviously, you can see that this whole video I have been handling him, and they are pretty good at it. So it's not just a display animal that you can keep in its cage the whole time. You definitely can take leopard geckos out. I would suggest when you're first getting to know your leopard gecko to give them some time to adjust to their terrarium. But after maybe a week mark, you can start gently introducing them to handling. You can do this by putting your hand in the tank and letting them get used to it there. And as they slowly build up trust with you, you'll be able to slowly take them out. I suggest the scoop method under them so it doesn't feel quite as much like a predator. And then once you have them out, it's just the hand over hand method, as Dormy just excellently demonstrated. Obviously, each of your leopard geckos is going to have a different personality. Dormy tends to be just super adventurous and he is constantly moving around, but some leopard geckos will just sleep on you and enjoy your warmth and will just sit on your shoulder. So it all just depends on your individual gecko. The very last thing that I wanted to mention is where you can buy these guys. Leopard geckos are pretty common reptiles at this point, so I wouldn't be surprised if you'd be able to find one at any of your local pet stores or big box stores. They're definitely going to be there. However, some places to buy them are better than others, and supporting businesses that you like is a good way to promote good husbandry of these guys while they're in the stores. Obviously, you can find them at many different stores. You can also find them sometimes at rescues and sometimes by breeders. It really depends on what you're looking for. It's really up to you. And the important thing more than that is just to make sure that you're looking for a healthy gecko that is alert, bright, and has that nice chunky tail. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Sienna, and if you liked the video, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and like and comment if you have any suggestions for future videos. Dormy, I really appreciated you being here. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Okay, you can go back.